Welcome to Real Crime Stories. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the rain as you dive into tonight's chilling tale. If you love true crime and horror, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. Now, turn off the lights, and let the story begin. Story: My grandpa's unsolved case that still haunts him. I've heard a lot of stories from my grandfather. He was a detective for 27 years of his life, and I grew up listening to the tales of he and his fellow lawmen. As a child, he obviously amended the stories quite a bit to make them age appropriate. But as I grew up, more and more of the true stories came out. Starting about 2 years ago, my grandpa got sick. He's been on a slow decline ever since. And while it's been one of the hardest things I've ever had to deal with, his illness acted as the catalyst for a set of stories he'd never before brought up. He said he kept them, filed away deep in the folder he doesn't like to open. He calls them the impossible ones. But this last one, the one he told me last night, he says it's the one that still keeps him up some nights. The one he thinks about every day. He said he's looked over the case files more times than he can remember. Done a full re-examination of it all more times than he can remember. And it never makes any more sense. He said he only told me now because he can feel in his bones that he doesn't have a lot of time left. I recorded him telling me the story. So what follows is my transcription of the case. Verbatim. I've only excluded his coughing fits and any off-topic remarks made during the telling of the case. The case was a murder, kidnapping. At least that's what it looked like. And it was me and Olson. I've told you about him. There was a family. The Nebels. There was Benjamin, the husband, Jennifer, the wife, and Katie, their 6-year-old daughter. One of their neighbors had gone out for the paper around 6 a.m. and saw the Nebels' front door wide open. When she went over to see if everything was okay, she saw the wife's body. The neighbor called 911 and eventually we were sent over there. Now, when I say there was no outward signs of a struggle, I mean it. There was no sign whatsoever that anything had happened. Well, except for the dead body. But even her body, there were no wounds, no marks of any kind. I'm getting ahead of myself. On our way to the house, it came over the radio that the husband and daughter were unaccounted for. If you're thinking, the husband did it, we did too, obviously. Problem was, both the family's cars were still in the garage, so we think they might be on foot. Some officers canvassed the neighborhood, and no one had seen them, including 2 neighbors that were on their porches for hours starting in the early morning. No one had heard any kind of commotion coming from their house either. I mentioned the wife's body. She didn't have a hair out of place. She was on her back in the kitchen. About a third of her upper body was under the table. We found out after the autopsy that, well, she just died. There was no cause that they could find. She'd been a perfectly healthy woman. Didn't smoke, didn't drink, ate right, exercised. It was like she'd just blinked her eyes and gone from alive to dead. Anyways, we searched the house. We went through it with a fine-tooth comb. Basement to attic. Found nothing. No evidence of a struggle. No weapon. Nothing. So we left. We'd spent hours in that house. Thought maybe we should come back in a day or two with some fresh eyes. We went over to where Benjamin worked. He was a supervisor at a lumber yard. According to his coworkers, he'd shown up at work that morning just before 5 a.m. When he got in, he worked on this narrow crate thing he was building in his office. Something he'd told his coworkers was a project for his house. According to the other morning's supervisor, he'd only built about half of the thing. Around 6:15, he said he was running to the bathroom. And that was the last anyone saw him. They never saw him leave. While we were at the lumberyard, I realized I'd left my notes at the house. We drove back over there. And we got there while they were taking the wife's body away. As soon as we walked in, the stench hit us like a bus. It was what a newly discovered but long dead body smells like. We knew it obviously couldn't have been the wife. We asked a few of the officers and forensics folks that were still at the house what the smell was. And they told us that it had only started a few minutes before we'd gotten back there. I'm not exaggerating when I say the smell was everywhere in the house. I've smelled some dead ones before, but this smelled like every wall in the place was lined with corpses. Pretty quickly, we found that the smell was strongest leading up to the attic. Now, I told you before, we checked the attic. I checked it myself probably 5 times. But we went back up. Me and Olson. I was up the little pull-down ladder first. And when I poked my head up, I saw something. I saw a piece of wood. Like a box. You know, a crate. It was shaped kind of like a rifle case. Maybe 3 feet tall, 2 feet wide, maybe 6 inches deep. Rectangular. It was standing straight up. And there was blood leaking from it. We called the photographers and all the people in there. They all do their thing. And finally they pull out all the nails and open the box. Out falls the husband. Think about that. This guy was maybe 5 feet 10, 140 pounds, and he was put in a 3 foot by 2 foot by 6 inch crate. His bones were just a mess. His insides, all his organs, they were flattened. They were just wet, squishy pieces of fabric. Almost. He was stuffed in there like, I don't know what like. He was just a rectangle of blood, skin, and parts. His skin had the discoloration of a body that had been dead for about 2 weeks, which obviously didn't make sense since they'd seen him at work that morning. He was also missing his eyeballs. We were standing there trying to rationalize the whole situation when something caught everyone's ears at the same time. A little girl's voice, calling out for help. What followed was a sequence of all the people in the attic, and the rest of the house, and the people out on the lawn, and the few people that were standing on the other side of the yellow tape. All saying some variation of the phrase, "It sounds like it's coming from over there." Problem was, every single person swore they heard it coming from a different direction. Me, I heard it from right above me. No kidding. The first time I heard that little voice say, "Help me," I looked straight up, right up to the rafters. Of course she wasn't there. It was just my brain's response to where it perceived her voice as coming from. We had to listen to every one of these people tell us where they thought they heard her voice coming from. People swore up and down they heard it coming from the kitchen cabinets, the bedroom closets, the refrigerator, the tank behind the toilet, for God's sake. People on the street said they heard it from underneath cars, behind trees, on the sides of the houses next to the Nebels. Everyone heard her voice for about a minute and a half, 2 minutes tops. And then it just stopped. About 2 weeks after that day, the wife's sister had a funeral for Jennifer. It went fine. They buried her. All that. The husband's remains were cremated not long after that and put on display in a different part of the cemetery. I don't remember exactly when it happened, but at some point over the few weeks after he was cremated, someone stole his urn. It was missing for about 6 months. And then one day we get a call. Find out a groundskeeper at the cemetery had called in. The wife had been dug up and posed like she was leaning against the grave, just relaxing. She had the urn in her hands, but it was wrapped in skin. Well, they tested it, and it was the husband's skin. They'd pretty well reconstructed the man after he poured out the crate. And he hadn't been missing any skin. And remember I told you his skin was discolored? Well, this skin was perfectly preserved. And inside the urn, with his ashes, there were 3 eyeballs. Only one of them was the husband's. It's been, what, 22 years. I still hear that girl's voice calling out sometimes. And I don't mean my memory or mind is playing tricks on me. Ask your grandmother. She's heard her. The same 6-year-old voice. And then, I remember it was May 12th, 2007. I was going to pick up a pizza for us. I saw that girl. I saw Katie Nabel. I don't mean I saw her grown up. I don't mean I saw a little girl that looked like her when she was young. I mean I saw that fucking kid. She was standing outside the Walgreens right by our old house, crying. I pulled over and got out of the car, and I started to walk up to her. I can't explain how I felt in that moment. I was nauseous. I was so afraid, terrified, more than I've ever been. She looked right at me and said in that same voice, "Help me, please. I don't know what the hell happened." But she just disappeared. I never took my eyes off her. She was just there 1 second, gone the next. I thought I was losing my mind. I was seriously worried about my mental health. But then, about an hour after I got back home, the phone rang. It was Olson. Hadn't talked to the son of a bitch in 5 years. And he called me that night. Said he saw Katie Nabel sitting on a bus stop bench, crying. He lived on the other side of the country. ... Killed himself the next day. My grandpa took a deep breath after that. There's never a good ending to these stories. I know. If there was, they wouldn't be the impossible ones. I'd have figured them out one way or the other. And I know I've told you some others. But that girl's voice still wakes me up in the middle of the night. Sometimes I hear it from downstairs. Sometimes from the bathroom. Ellipsis. Sometimes I'll be laying on my side, facing away from your grandmother. And it'll sound like it's coming from her mouth. We never found a trace of that girl. Nothing. I told you what they do with those cases. God damn it. I'm sorry. That's it. That's the worst one. Some of the other ones might sound worse to you. But that's the worst for me. Okay. Back before me and Olson were partners, I was with this guy Manth. He was a weird son of a bitch. But he was good at the job. He'd been on about a decade longer than me. And he taught me quite a bit. As a matter of fact, he's the one that told me there would be times when I wouldn't be able to solve the case. He said it wouldn't be because of me or lack of skill or anything like that. Wouldn't be the evidence. Wouldn't be the witnesses. He said there'd be times when, how'd he put it? You'd have all the pieces of the puzzle. You know what the puzzle should look like. But for a reason you don't know and can't understand. They just won't fit. Back in the late 80s, we drew a suspected homicide at this apartment building. Real pile of shit. Neighbors had complained about a smell coming from one of the units. So some officers went to check it out. Ends up we get called. The girl was found wrapped completely in dental floss. I mean, each of her fingers and toes were individually wrapped, as were each of her limbs and her torso and her ears and the rest of her head. And then another layer went over everything. It was wrapped so none of her skin was visible. Can you imagine that? How long that must have taken. There were no weave patterns either. They just wrapped it around once, then continued with each new wraparound touching the one before it. How much floss you think that took? Hundreds of rolls, if not more. Thousands maybe. Never seen anything like it but that one time. Anyways, they identified the girl. She was some kid, 17 years old she was, from a couple states over. If I remember right, her name was, what was it? Kelly. That's it. Now, the guy who lived in the apartment hadn't been seen around the building for a few days. We talked to the neighbors, people that lived on the same floor, a few others, maybe. Apparently, this guy, his name was Lucas. He kept to himself. We went to talk to the neighbors. None of them knew his name. And a few of them, they'd go, "Oh, you mean the guy from whatever unit he was in? 512, I think. Whatever it was. Guy is an asshole." Or something to that effect. He never talked to anybody. Never nodded in the halls. Nothing. He'd lived in the building 6 years. But for about the last year, 10 months or so, no one had seen him. His rent was paid by check through the mail, and he'd had his mail forwarded to a P.O. box. So the scene. His apartment was dark. We'd shown up there in the morning, about 9 a.m., but his apartment made it feel like it was midnight. He'd painted the windows black. The same with the walls. But on the walls were, you know, those cliché ransom letters, where all the words are made up, different letters cut out of magazines. It was that, but over every inch of every black wall in the place. The messages were disturbing. I don't remember what it all said verbatim, but they were just these long, sort of vague confessions. "It's almost the end. He's coming for me. Please stop." That type of stuff. It was a 2-bedroom apartment, and floor to ceiling, wall to wall, it was just hundreds and thousands magazine letters making words that formed this guy's pleas for help. Fingerprint folks came in and did their thing. Like I said, this guy lived alone, never had a noise complaint. No one ever saw him with anyone else. Neighbors in the next units over and across the hall never heard a peep from his apartment. Not even a TV or radio. But somehow, there were no less than, what was it, 90-some odd different fingerprints all over his house. Weirder than that, is that all the fingerprints were all carefully placed. Like one person went up to the table, wall, refrigerator, door, whatever, placed their thumb down. Then another person came up, placed their finger down, and so on and so forth. The entire apartment, every surface had these fingerprints. Intricately placed, evenly spaced. We found out that the only ones they identified 2 sets of fingerprints. One belonging to Lucas, and another to a woman who had died in West Virginia in the early 60s. A few years before he was born. So the girl that was found dead in the apartment, she had no connection to Lucas that anyone could find. She also had no fingerprints on her. But it didn't look like anyone had intentionally wiped her down. They said she'd been dead about a week, and that the cause of death was, get this, suffocation by dental floss. And in the course of the autopsy, they found that a few of her organs were also wrapped in floss the same way her body was. Her heart, liver, a lung, her kidneys, her spleen, all wrapped up in dental floss. And her stomach was bursting at the seams with it, just like her esophagus. Anyways, we had our suspect, this Lucas guy. We started digging, looking for associates, places he spent time, things like that. Pretty soon we find out he did some off-the-books work at a landscaping company. Guy there tells us he hasn't been to work in 3 days, and that he figured he'd quit. We pulled a few more threads, but nothing seemed to pan out. It looked like this guy killed Kelly and then went off the grid. Then about a week and a half after we got the case, we put Lucas's picture everywhere. And if I'm not mistaken, the higher-ups told us all to tell everyone it was for a robbery. We started getting calls from different businesses saying Lucas had come in, stopped for gas, got a burger at McDonald's, picked up shampoo at a grocery store. All these menial tasks. Probably 15 different things. Problem was, he apparently did all these things at locations that spanned the whole city. And he did them all at the same damn time. 10:48 a.m. Something like that. All the security camera footage matched up. His credit card records matched up. All the purchases happened at the exact same time. And I'll be damned if it wasn't him at the locations. Not look-alikes, but him. Now, a lot of this stuff I'm telling you, it's weird, yeah? When it all happened, that's really all it was. It was just weird, odd. It was never really all that scary. Some things were, of course, but generally it was just stuff that boggled the mind. When we watched those security tapes, though, it's hard to explain it. Me, Manth, and anyone who was in the room at the times we watched these tapes, every time. I think there was 11 places we had to watch the tapes. And every time, he'd stand for a few seconds, 5 to 10 seconds, and he would just stare at the camera, stone-faced. And it was like he was looking into my soul. I can only describe how it felt for me, but I know for a fact the others felt the same way. It felt like someone was squeezing their fist around my heart. The breath left me. I started sweating. It was the worst fear. Pure terror. 2 of the security guys had to leave the room. One started hyperventilating. Another threw up. It only lasted as long as he was looking straight at the camera. When he'd look away, everyone would breathe a sigh of relief. It was, anyways, Manth. He came to me the last day of us going over the security cameras. And he told me he had something. Son of a bitch had gone over the pictures from the apartment, of all the magazine letters. And he found a pattern. There were certain letters that were written in a particular font. He put those through a cipher. What did he call it? C's, Caesarean shift. If you moved the letters around. I don't remember how many. 4, 5, something. It made a name that kept repeating. It was the longest of long shots. But we started looking into Bruce Hiller. Turns out Bruce Hiller has another apartment over in town near our own. We talked to the people there, They tell us he's the nicest guy in the world. They don't see him much. But whenever they do, he's polite, conversational, real good guy. His apartment is immaculate. I mean, it looked like he went over the entire place with a Q-tip every day, every hour. The building itself was it was decent, kinda run down, but his place, for what it was spotless. We go though everything, and pretty soon it's time to go check the basement storage unit. The way they were set up was they were just partitioned off with little wooden and wire doors. You could see into everything. In Lucas's, or Bruce's, whatever his damn name was. In his, it was packed floor to ceiling with stuff on either side of the door. But we could see through the door. And there he was, towards the back of the unit with his back to us, reaching up onto a shelf. We could barely see him. Just kind of make out his silhouette. The only lights down there were single bulbs hanging from the ceiling with pull strings. We shine our lights in his unit, pull our weapons, tell him to turn around slowly and keep his hands up. He doesn't move, he just stays there, reaching up on the shelf. We move forward a bit, keep telling him to turn around, show us his hands, blah blah blah. But he doesn't move an inch. The building manager had a rapport with him, apparently, so we get him and he tries pleading with him to turn around. But Lucas just kept standing there with his arm up and his back to us. Manager unlocks the door. We get him out of there. Now, this was a year or two before tasers really started catching on. So we didn't have that option. We inch our way towards the guy. And as we get closer, it becomes clear that, when I say he's not moving, I mean he's not moving. He's standing as still as a statue. Pretty soon we realize he's not breathing. We kept our weapons up, kept our lights on him, kept yelling all that shit. Did it by the book. But we got up to him and confirmed that wasn't breathing. We call in the troops. When it was time to move the body, they had to tip him. It was like rigor mortis had set in while he was reaching up to the shelf. It was his face, though. It was the most anguished, terrified look I'd ever seen. Picture yourself screaming at the top of your lungs. And think about what your face looks like when you do that. That was his face. We asked the people who lived above his storage unit if they'd heard anything. Of course they hadn't. When Mance saw the guy, it did something to him. I mean, I saw Lucas's face. It scared the Christ out of me. No two ways about it. Gave me that same feeling as when we watched the security tapes. But man, the guy never said another word. Ever. Never spoke to me. His wife. His kids. Never said another word as far as I know. Last I heard he was living in an old folks' home. Poor son of a bitch just looks out the window all day. That was some years ago. Though. I hope for his sake he's dead. Terrible as it sounds. They did an autopsy, and, well, it was something with his heart. Blood pressure. Something. But what it came down to was that he was literally scared to death. I didn't think it was real. But they assured us it was the only explanation. That was it. He died. We never found anything else on his connection to the girl. Why he had an alias. Why he had a second apartment. Nothing. We did find what the tip of his finger was touching when he was reaching up on that shelf. Though, there was a ball of dental floss. Maybe the size of, I don't know, a racquetball. You know, one of those bouncy blue ones? Got a call a day or two later. They told us that inside that ball of floss, 7 human teeth. Far as I know, none of them have ever been identified. It was, 1993, I think. You know, after a while these things start to blend together. Dates, some names, and I'm an old man now. That doesn't help, but I remember the important things. I don't know if it's that I just have a good memory or if these things were just burnt into my mind. Ah well, no matter. We drew a body in a department store. Kohl's department store. You know, the one right up there on North Avenue? Well, this one started off weird right off the bat. Someone placed the call for the body at about 2 in the afternoon. This is a department store that opened at 9 in the morning. 8, whenever. But it had been open. People walking around the place. For hours. So we think, okay, maybe the body was hidden somewhere in the building. Nope. The body was right inside the main entrance of the place. Right by the first checkout. Someone must have dropped the body there and took off. Right? These are all things we're thinking on the drive over. The body was posed. There was no way someone had been in a rush when they did it. And there's no way that people just didn't notice someone doing it. It would have been impossible to miss. Did I mention it was a kid? Yeah, he was maybe 10, 11 years old. The pose was. Remember we watched The Exorcist? When the girl comes down the stairs, bent over backward walking on her hands and feet? That's how this boy was. But, you know, not moving. His back was arched, stomach facing up, just looking up at us upside down. His face just pain. Just pure pain. All he had on was a pair of white briefs. This kid, God, my grandpa was visibly distraught, so we get there, and the first thing we ask is, well, what did the guy look like? Someone had to have seen him. But no one could recall seeing anything. Not even the lady who'd been standing at the register that this poor kid was posed in front of not 10 feet away. Now, it's weird enough. You know, the way this body is positioned. The position is weird enough. So we think rigor must have set in. The forensics folks get over there. They take the pictures. All that. Then. Christ. Then they, you know, they get ready to lay the body out. Take a closer look at him. And as soon as the forensics guy, Benny, I remember his name was. As soon as Benny lays a finger on him. And I mean the moment. The second. The microsecond. The exact instance his finger touches this kid's shoulder. The body just instantly crumples. Like a deflated balloon. I feel bad saying it. That poor kid. But it was just a puddle of a person. A puddle of skin. We find out later that this kid's bones. They were dust. I don't mean that figuratively. Either. His bones were ground to just a fine powder. The only mark on his body was a handprint around his neck. And the cause of death was determined to be strangulation. Christ. He was a goddamn kid. So anyways, we had our work cut out for us. This was a case where there were 40, 50, 60 witnesses. We checked the security cameras. And it was the most bizarre, surreal thing. The whole thing was caught on tape. At about 10:30 that morning. A person wearing all black. Who kept his head down the whole time so we couldn't see his face. came in holding the kid's hand. They went over to where the body was found. And the kid gets into the position we found him in. The guy then chokes the kid for about 40 seconds, killing him. People are just walking on by, walking around them, looking at them, but ignoring what's happened. The lady at the counter looked over a few times. Didn't do a thing. Just kept checking people out. Doing her job. The guy finishes choking the kid. Stands up. And the son of a bitch bows. And the part that really got me. People in the store gave him a round of applause. Then he just left. We were fuming. I remember I yelled at some of the employees and people that were in the store when we got there. What the hell were you doing just standing there? What the hell's the matter with you? You sons of bitches? You know? But not a one of them couldn't really explain their reaction to what had happened. They said they remembered seeing the guy, the kid, all of it, but when it was happening, it didn't feel like anything wrong was going on. They said they all saw it. But instead of being like, what the hell? It just seemed like a normal thing. We asked everyone what the guy had looked like. And they were all 100% sure in the descriptions they gave of the guy's face. By what the witnesses gave us. The guy was either white, black, Hispanic, or Asian, with brown, black, blonde, red, or gray hair, blue, green, or brown eyes, perfectly smooth or extremely wrinkled skin, a big or a small nose, and he had a picture-perfect set of pearly whites. Or he had a mouth that looked like he ate nothing but junk food and rocks and hadn't brushed a day in his life. It didn't make any sense. And with everyone having no real idea what they saw, none of what they gave us was a help. At all. Remember I said the body was called in around 2 in the afternoon? And yeah, that means people were coming in and just ignoring. Not realizing, I don't know, whatever the hell was happening. But no one did anything about the body for almost 4 hours. We went to listen to the 911 call. And we find out it came from the payphone right across the street from the Kohl's. At the McDonald's there used to be a payphone. Now, I heard a gravelly, deep voice. But Olsen, he heard someone more high-pitched. Doesn't really matter. Just another weird thing about this. Operator goes, 911. Yada yada yada. Guy says, did anyone call yet? Operator goes, I'm sorry? Did anyone call about the body yet? What body? Guy gets all frustrated. Starts huffing and puffing. Goes, there's a body at Kohl's. North Avenue. Do your fucking job. Your goddamn job. Whatever he said. Then he goes, I don't have all day. We end up looking at the security tapes from the McDonald's there. And right after the guy did what he did to the boy, he walked over to the McDonald's and sat at one of the tables outside. And he just sat there, staring at the Kohl's, just waiting. Didn't budge an inch from about 10:35 until he called around 2. Just sat there like a statue, staring. Then he got up and made the call. After he hung up, he stood at the payphone, not moving, watching the Kohl's from there. Watched the black and whites show up. Watched us show up. Then finally around 4 he just left. Took off down the street. This was one where we didn't really find anything. Never found out who the boy was. No one ever reported him missing. Certainly never found the guy that killed him. Get this, though. A whole mess of people that were in the store when he did what he did. They ended up killing themselves. 6 or 7 of them in the months immediately following that day. Then, I found out when the case was reopened. Guy who took it over. Young guy named Smith. He went to re-interview some of the witnesses. And 16 more had committed suicide. Guy didn't just kill the boy. Whatever he did, whatever he was, he took a whole lot more people with him. That boy, though, I'll never get that sight out of my eyes. The way he was posed. I thank God I never saw anything like that again. Some of the other cases might have affected me more overall. But that was a sight that was the one. It's not always people, you know. The impossible ones weren't limited to just people. Back in the late 80s, early 90s maybe, we caught a call. A suspected murder had taken place. Mail had filled up the mailbox. Eventually someone called the police for a wellness check. Some uniforms go to check, look through the window, and they see blood on the living room carpet and ceiling. They go in, clear the house. We get called. I remember the phone call. It was the same as the calls for the impossible cases. Yeah, Grandpa's name, it's another one. We could always tell how shitty our day was going to be by the tone of voice of whoever called us. It was me and a temporary partner I had. This guy Malloy. He'd come over from across the state. But like every detective, he was familiar with the impossible ones. Though he said at his last shop, they were referred to as the unexplained. Different name, but the same mind-boggling bullshit. Anyways, we pull up to the house and find everyone standing outside it. We get out of the car thinking they're just trying to preserve the scene. But then we see that everyone is real on edge, jumping when we shut our doors. Staring at the ground, you know, just acting real antsy. We ask them what's going on. But no one will say a word. We go around asking if the house has been cleared. And finally a uniformed, looked like his first day on the job, nods his head a little bit. Malloy and I go in the house. And, you know, it looks normal. Just a normal suburban house. There was a stain on the living room carpet. And it was very clearly blood. It was made all the more obvious by the fact that there was blood dripping from the ceiling. You ever seen a ceiling with flood damage? Where it looks like dropping a feather on it from the other side is gonna make it come crashing down. That's how the spot above the stain was. It was dark red and looked thin as wet tissue. So obviously, we think there must be a body upstairs. Based on the call we got and how the folks outside were acting. We were expecting something real, you know. Something real gruesome. We go upstairs, figure out which room the stain is below. But when we walk in, there's nothing. Room is normal. Not 2 seconds after we opened that door. That's when we first hear it. Tap tap. Tap tap tap. The best way I can describe it is like they tapped their pinky. Then a half second later their ring finger. Then middle index thumb. Boom boom boom. Real fast. Malloy and I both spin around. It sounded like someone was tapping on the wall in the room across the hall from the one we were in. Now, the door to that room is closed. We'd been informed that this woman lived by herself. Didn't have any kids, no husband, not even any family that lived in the state. So there shouldn't be anyone else there. Malloy and I draw our weapons. Start doing the whole, open the door. Show us your hands. Yada yada yada. Thing. But no one responds. We stand there long enough with our weapons pointed at the wall. I was pointing at the door. Malloy had his trained on the wall. We stand there long enough and don't hear anything back that we start wondering if we just heard something from outside or something. The unis had cleared the house. And they'd never done us wrong before. But with how weird they were acting, we wanted to be sure. Just as I start to take a step to pass Malloy and move toward the other room, we hear it again. Tap tap. Tap tap tap. Only this time, it sounded like it was in the room on the other side of the wall from the one we were in. You know, on the same side of the hall. Just a door down? I yell out, police. Step out into the hallway with your hands up, and again. No response. Tap tap. Tap tap tap. This one comes from the opposite wall from the previous one, which would put whoever was doing it on the steps leading upstairs. Malloy was still standing in the doorway, so he took a step and leaned over to take a look. Then looked over to me and shook his head. There wasn't anyone there. The next set of taps. That same pattern. They came from above us. Like in the attic. Then higher up on the wall by the stairs. Then down the hall. Then from underneath my feet like someone was tapping on the ceiling in the living room. Then back on the wall in the opposite room. Over and over and over and over and over and over. Sounded like a miniature stampede was happening all around us. It lasted about 30 seconds. Then as quickly as it started, it just stopped. Malloy and I stood there for a good 10 minutes. Guns up, arms aching, wondering what the hell was going on. When we both finally calmed down enough to act rationally, we went through and cleared the house again. Attic, top floor, ground floor, basement. We did it ourselves just to make sure it got done thoroughly. And there was no one. House was empty except for us. So then we have to deal with the fact that the ceiling in the living room is leaking blood. But there doesn't seem to be a source. The bedroom where the leak should have been. Where the body should have been. There was a throw rug in there. You know, over the hardwood floor. So we moved the rug. There's a little, door, type thing. I guess you'd call it. A little door in the floor. Maybe the size of a pack of cigarettes. With a hinge that's flush with the floor. I open it, shine a flashlight in. But there's nothing there. No source for where the blood could be coming from. And even after we had some guys come in and take out the floorboards, I took out the insulation and it was dry. The material that made up the ceiling. While it was soaked with blood on the bottom of it, it was completely dry on top. Which, I mean, it's impossible. It's like the source of the blood was in between a half-inch thick piece of plaster. That was a hell of a long day. I'll tell you. So, it's late now. Probably 2:30 in the morning. Malloy and I are still at the house. Looking around. We finally got a few people to come in. You know, fingerprint folks. Photographers. They're getting their jobs done. Me and Malloy are standing in the kitchen when he goes, "Did you hear that?" I hadn't heard a thing. He goes, "There it is again." I'm straining my ears trying to hear what he's hearing. And when I turn to look at him and ask what he thinks he's hearing, I won't lie to you. My heart skipped a beat. Malloy was standing there, staring straight ahead into my eyes. But it was like he was looking through me. His face had gone completely limp. Slack. And his eyes looked like they'd been turned off. Like there was no life behind them. His mouth hung open like he was just totally brain dead. Malloy? I say. He just stared through me. To the point that I looked over my shoulder to make sure no one was behind me. When I turned back around, Malloy was pointing to the basement door. I looked over and saw that it was closed. When I looked back again, Malloy was pointing, but the life had returned to his face. He looked normal. I asked Malloy what the hell had happened, and he just said, "You didn't hear that?" I told him I hadn't. He said we needed to check the basement again. We head over and open the door. Only now the lights wouldn't turn on. They'd worked fine the entire day. But all of a sudden now, nothing. We get our flashlights out and head down. I asked him why we're checking the basement again. But he just kept saying, "We need to check the basement again." You didn't hear that? We get down there, and everything looks the same as it had all day. Tap tap. Tap tap tap. The taps sounded like they were against one of the metal racks that lined the basement walls. We shine our lights all around. There's nothing. No one. Tap tap. Tap tap tap. This time it sounds like it's on a cardboard box. You didn't hear that? Malloy says again. The tapping starts all around us. It's on metal, cardboard, plastic, wood, drywall, plaster. It gets to the point that it's deafening. I shine my light all around and it eventually lands on Malloy, who had at some point moved to the corner. He had that same dead look on his face again. And he was pointing towards the ceiling. Just behind me. I consider myself something of a brave man. But in that moment, I was about as scared as I could have been. I did not want to look behind me. It felt like something was there, looking at me, waiting for me to turn around. You didn't hear that? Malloy said again. You didn't hear that? 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 He just kept repeating it, over and over and over. Then he started slurring his words, like he'd sound if he was drunk. I'm yelling out at him to shut his mouth, scared out of my mind. And so, there's already been a lot of this that makes you scratch your head. You know, say, what the hell? But then, I can tell my grandpa is reliving this in his head. I worked up enough courage to turn around. Malloy was still repeating that over and over. But I turned around and looked up towards where he was pointing, and there was a spot of the plaster in the basement ceiling that was newer than the rest of it. The same size as that little door in the floor on the second level. We'd been through the house more times than I can remember, and neither of us had noticed that door until now, which seemed unlikely. The tapping seems to be getting louder, faster. I got Malloy yelling over and over. And I'm so afraid. I think I might piss myself. It gets so loud that I cover my ears. Start hunching over. I mean, it sounded like you could have heard it on the other side of the neighborhood. Then it all stopped again. I looked over to Malloy and saw him sobbing into his hands. Then he walked up the basement stairs without saying a word. I wanted to get the hell out of there. But at the same time I didn't want to skimp on my duties. I yelled up the stairs for a few of the construction guys to come down and take down the entire piece of plaster that spot was on. They unscrewed the screws, and when one side of the piece was lower than the others, a little bag slides out and falls to the ground. The bag had fingers in it. 3 fingers. If I remember right, they were It was an index, ring, and pinky finger. We eventually went back upstairs. And when we did, there were spots like the one in the basement all over the place. The ceiling in the living room had stopped bleeding. But now we had more of these spots. Must have been 5 or 6 on each level of the house. Inside each were bags of fingers, from pinky to thumb. We had them all tested. And far as we could tell, at least some of them belonged to previous owners of the house. Going back decades, turns out that everyone who'd lived in the house had died. One of them was a suicide. But the rest were natural causes. It was odd, because all the fingers were in perfect condition. Like they'd just been removed from the body and decomp hadn't started yet. Doesn't make any goddamn sense. Malloy, that poor bastard. He quit the job the following day. Refused to talk about what was going on in his head during that day. He tried committing suicide twice that I know of. Now he lives with his daughter in Monterey, California. In the few years after that day, I tried to check in on him from time to time, and he would apparently have these fits where he just screams. "You didn't hear that?" over and over. I was supposed to go back to that house a few days later. I showed up, and when I got to the front door, I just couldn't do it. That fear set in again. Made me feel like I was gonna pass out. I knew right from the jump this one didn't have an answer. I still did my due diligence. Did what I could to find some answers. But I refused to go back in that house. Oh, and the woman, one who lived there, a neighbor down the street had seen her walking the morning we got the call. So several days after she'd stopped getting her mail for whatever reason. Even though she was apparently home, she'd walked down the street and onto the main road. We'd tracked her security tapes. But she turned the corner from North Avenue on 92nd Street and just vanished. Poof, into thin air. Wondered for a long time what happened to her. Then one day, almost 7 years later, we get a tape in the mail. It had been sent to the precinct, addressed to both me and Malloy. It was a security tape from a gas station. The time stamp was the day after we'd been to her house. So the day after she'd vanished. About 2 hours after. Across the street from the gas station. Some folks were doing some tree work. That woman had walked up to the area these folks were doing the work. Set her purse down with her ID on top of it. Leaned forward, and went head first into a wood chipper. Messed up, right? Well, even more messed up than that? The tape came from a gas station in Florida. About 1.200 miles. Never did figure out how she got from the corner of 92nd and North to Tampa Bay, Florida in under 2 hours. So the very first one. The first impossible one. That was, what, 76, 77 feet? Somewhere in there. Around a year after I made detective. Anyways, I'm sitting at my desk when the sergeant comes up and whispers something to my partner. This guy man. I think I told you about him before. You know what happened to him. So Sarge whispers to Manth and heads back to his office. Manth just kinda hangs his head a bit. I ask him what's going on, and he stands up and tells me to follow him. We go to the car. And on our way to wherever we're going, he gives me a little speech. Now, I'm paraphrasing here. I've been a detective 11 years now. Steve, my grandpa said it was fine if I used his name. I've solved a lot of cases. I'm not the best detective there's ever been. But I'm damn good at my job. Generally speaking, if there's a murder, I'll get the guy, or gal. One time it even ended up being a dog. But you get what I mean. But sometimes, he says, sometimes there's cases you can't solve. No matter how good you are. Sometimes things just won't make a lick of sense. The clues will take you to a dead end. The evidence will just raise more questions. You know, when you do a puzzle, sometimes you'll have the box there so you can see what you're supposed to be putting together. It's like you're doing a puzzle. You know what it should look like. You got all the pieces on the table in front of you. But they just don't go together. There's no reason why. They just don't. The department doesn't like word of these getting out. You're not under any obligation to not talk about them. Don't think I'm trying to scare you or anything. They prefer to keep them quiet. Don't want to scare the people. You know, we got a name for M around the department. Just a dumb little name. We call M the impossible ones. 'Cause that's what they are. No two ways about it. They're impossible. You might have heard someone mention them before. I'd heard the term, impossible one, in passing. Never really knew what it was about. So Steve says, we're headed to one now. I knew it was just a matter of time until we caught one. Sarge got the details from some of the unis down there. We drove out to Oak Creek. You know, the farmland out there? We had to drive down this long dirt road between two giant plots of corn stalks. And finally this house comes into view. Got the black and whites parked all around it. Yellow tape. The whole deal. We pull up, and the lieutenant was there. Which, you know, I wasn't used to that. Manth tells me, whenever we get a weird one, they send out a higher up. LT just shakes his head and tells us, good luck. So, you know, we walk past the tape. Everybody's out there doing their jobs. There's a group crowded around this big flag pole they have. We're walking up to the house to talk to the responding officers. And I overheard some folks talking about how it just doesn't make sense. You know, how is it possible? Stuff like that. So right away, I'm getting that something is off. But I still don't know why we're even there. We get in the house. And a few unis are standing in the foyer. This house. It wasn't a nice place. There were no walls. Or, well, no drywall. It was just the slats. Like someone had started building the house but given up halfway through. We go up and ask for a rundown of what's happened. And two of the officers tell us to follow them upstairs. One of the unis says, I've been on the job about 2 years. I've seen some messed up things. But this has got to be the worst. They take us up to a bedroom on the second floor. And before we turn to go in, the uni says, brace yourself. I don't remember what I was expecting. Exactly. Probably a whole lot of blood. Gus. You know, something like that. But there wasn't any. There was no mess. The room was absolutely immaculate. Like they'd gone over it with a toothbrush just before we walked in. The bedroom was empty except for a small, almost like a TV tray. You know, that stands up? Yeah, there's one of those. And there's medical supplies on it. You know, bandages, wraps, scalpel, scissors, sutures, all of them clean as a whistle. But the body, there was a body on the floor. Sort of halfway leaning against the wall. The feet had been sewn on. They were much paler than the rest of his body. You know, like the feet clearly came from another person. Again, there was no blood, but at the same time, there was evidence that the operation, if you want to call it that, happened in that very room. Weirder yet, one of his hands had also been stitched on. But just one of them. This body's right hand. It belonged to its original owner. And it had a stitching needle and thread in it. Like the son of a bitch had been doing this to himself. Problem was, his feet and hand, the ones that actually belonged to him, were nowhere to be found. As, you know, as freaky as this was, it was the smell that was the worst. It was the most rank, putrid dead body smell I've ever encountered. And I've smelled quite a few. Now, later, they did an autopsy. The cause of death couldn't be determined. But the level of decomp on the outside was, you know, hours. By the time Manth and I showed up on the scene, I don't remember what the call was. Or, you know, how it was found out that there was a potential murder there. But when we showed up, the body was still fresh. They did the autopsy not long after that, and the decomp on the inside of the body. You know, his organs and all that? At least a month. Like he'd been sitting against that wall for a month. Now, I don't know how much you know about human decomp. Hopefully not much. But it happens in stages. Right after a person dies. First few days, not too much happens. Then they'll start bloating and all that. After about a week, the skin will start to turn black. And like I said, none of this had happened yet. But on the inside, a little after a week, things will start breaking down. Maggots, bugs, insects, all that. They'll start laying eggs, feeding off the organs. And the organs, they'll start breaking down, leak out of the body. Sounds gross, I know, but, so the outside of the body was fine, as far as decomposition, but the inside of the body was just, I don't know how to put it, it was just, flakes. Like dried fruit. His lungs, spleen, kidneys, bladder, stomach, it was all decomposed, covered in creepy crawlers. It didn't make any sense. It was, drumroll, impossible. And even more than that, you know how I said the room was perfectly clean? Not a drop of blood? It's because the body had been completely exsanguinated. I mean completely. The body shouldn't have looked the way it did on the outside considering what had happened on the inside. If I wouldn't have seen it with my own eyes, I would have sworn to you it was you know, like a wax statue or something. But that's not the weirdest thing. Not to me at least. So, outside, when we pulled up, there was that group of unis gathered around the flagpole. When we were done, you know, looking around the inside of the house, trying to make heads or tails of what happened, the folks that brought us into the house told us to follow them out. We get down to the flagpole, and this thing is big. Must have been 25, 30 feet tall, big as the kind you'd see at a school. We walk up and kinda get everyone to clear a path for us so we can see what all the commotion is about. Manth was walking ahead of me, and I just hear him say, "Jesus fucking Christ." I look around him and I see what everyone is looking at. There is a body at the base of the flagpole. I don't mean next to it. I don't mean near it. The flagpole had gone through the man's lower sternum. Blood had pooled around the area. And by the looks of it, the man hadn't been dead longer than a few hours. Now, after the fact, we had learned that the flagpole had been on that property since the 1960s. At least on paper. It hadn't been replaced or anything since then. There were two flags at the top. An American flag and our state flag. Both of them were blowing in the wind. And they were clean. Besides the normal weather where a flag gets. They were both clean. And so was the flagpole. A little dirt here and there. Maybe. But for a body to have impaled by it. And for it to have slid down the flagpole. Both it and the flags should have been covered in blood and guts. And there was no way anyone had lifted the flagpole from the ground and then dropped it on him. There was just no way. Craziest thing about that one? Guy had died from a brain aneurysm. And before I forget, the guy on the flagpole was the owner of the property. The guy inside, sewing on new hands and feet for himself? Never identified, and neither were his new extremities. All right, I got one for you. In my whole career, I only ever dealt with one serial killer. You know, not that we were hoping there'd be a serial killer on the loose. Of course not. It's just, those are the cases that make careers. This was about 2 years before I was planning to retire. So, what, 99, 2000? Somewhere around there. If I could bag a serial killer, it would be the cherry on top of my whole career. I should have known right from the jump it was gonna be an impossible case. But, well, I don't know. Hope and the benefit of hindsight, I suppose. In the department, just amongst ourselves, we called this sick son of a bitch the backwards man. Hey now, we never claimed to be creative types. We called him that because we caught him on camera a few times. A bunch of times, actually. He'd approach his victims, but he'd walk up to them, backwards. He'd stand with his back to them. And he'd talk to them. He always wore the same thing. A long black coat with a big hood pulled up over his head. Winter, summer, didn't matter. Always wore the same thing. Always walked backwards. Now, if you're walking down the street and you see someone walking backwards towards you, what are you gonna do? You're gonna get out of the way of the weird son of a bitch. Right? Not with this guy. He'd walk up to these people and they'd stop. They'd talk to him. Talk to the back of his head. After they'd talk for a bit, 20, 30 seconds, he'd take off in the opposite direction. And they'd follow him. We tried following him on the cameras. And this is where it gets real weird. Downtown, you know. They have all kinds of cameras on the streets. There was one. Middle of the day he took someone. We got the footage from 6 different cameras. He walked up to this guy. Guy talked to the back of his head for a minute. And they started walking. Now, you're thinking that if he walks up to them backwards, then starts going in the other direction without turning around, he's just walking normally. Right? Well, on all of the cameras, his back was to it. Camera was facing east on Juno. His back was to it. Camera was facing west on Juno. His back was to it. Walking backwards. Camera was facing north on Water Street. His back was to the camera. Sounds like it doesn't make sense. Right? If he was walking east on Juno and you're looking at him from the south, you'd be looking at him in a profile. Right? No, sir. His back was to the camera. And he was walking sideways. crossing his feet one over the other. Didn't make a single shred of sense. All the cameras had the same timestamps. But we were watching this guy walk in distinctly different gates at the same time. Once they turned enough corners, they'd just disappear. We'd always check the nearby buildings, but there would never be any evidence of them having been there. We would eventually find the victims, but I'll get to that. Anyways, because of the whole camera thing, we obviously never saw his face. Not once. Chased this guy for 2 years. Interviewed, hundreds of folks who were in the areas this son of a bitch would take his victims. They all said the same things. I only saw his back. His back was always to me. I just thought he was a weird guy walking backwards down the street. No one we talked to ever saw his face. Except for one lady. We'd sent some unis out canvassing after the backwards man had taken a 13-year-old girl with him in the 3rd ward. They went door to door to a few apartment buildings. And there was one lady. She was in her 40s. Name was, what was it? Catherine something. It doesn't matter. So about a week after this girl had gone missing, we go to meet this woman. This Catherine. And it's hard to describe. But it was like she was ripped off the page of one magazine and pasted onto another. Her apartment was immaculate. The 3rd ward isn't a cheap place to live. You know that. She had big fancy bookcases. Big TV. Pristine furniture. She was a lawyer. Judging by the apartment and the pictures she happened to be in that were around her house, she was a real professional type. But the woman herself, she'd seen better days. In those pictures she was an attractive woman. She was dressed sharp. Hair was nice. Big, sparkly white smile. When we talked to her, she looked like she hadn't seen a shower in weeks. Her hair was all messed up. Her teeth were dirty. She was a mess. And she was afraid. She sat in a chair in the corner and watched the door while we talked. She was shaking like a leaf. We sat down to talk to her. Asked her what she'd seen. Her voice was all shaky. And she whispered, like there was someone in the room. She didn't want to hear what she was saying. Now, I'm paraphrasing here, but he walked up backwards to the girl. I watched him do it. He walked up backwards to her and just stood there. I wasn't too close to them, She was stuttering. You could tell she was terrified. She goes, but I could see the girl talking to the person. I was walking back to my office and I walked a bit closer, and as I walked by I threw my coffee in the trash beside them and he was just saying something over and over and over. The same thing. And she was talking to him like they were having a conversation. I ask her what he was saying. And she just starts hyperventilating. Freaking out. Takes us a good 10 minutes to calm her down. But we need to know. We have to know what this guy was saying. She goes. He was saying, is a house really a home if you aren't there? And he'd sniffle a little bit like he was sick. Then, is a house really a home if you aren't there? And another sniffle. Is a house really a home if you aren't there? And a sniffle. And then, she started crying real hard. Had to give her a minute to calm down again. Then she says, then I realized that it was a perfect copy every time. Like it was on repeat on a recorder or something. It did something to me. Hearing that, I thought I was gonna drop dead right there. I don't know what it was, but I thought I was gonna die. Then I asked what the girl was saying. She was. It's like she was hearing something different than I was. She was just going on. Oh yeah, me too. I love it there. Oh yeah, what about you? That's great. It didn't make any sense. Then I kinda got down close next to her, as comforting as I could be. And I asked her again. Did she see his face? Her eyes well up with tears again. Her hands start shaking. I can tell she's just about to break down again. Then she whispers, "His face. His face. His face." Then she starts yelling. His face. His face. We try to calm her down, but then she just stops. Goes dead silent for a second. Stares off into nothingness. Then it's like she composed herself in the blink of an eye and she goes, "Will you excuse me? I need to use the restroom." Before I tell her to go, I ask her again if she can tell me what the guy's face looked like. She's cool as a cucumber now. And she just says, "If you'll give me a moment, I'll collect myself and be right back with you. I'm very sorry. I just need to calm down for a second." I didn't really know what else to say. I mean, her change in demeanor it was jarring. Kinda left me and my partner stunned. And I couldn't tell her, no, you know? It was her house. She had every right to get up and go. And she did. My partner and I just kinda stood there and talked for a minute. Kinda going over what the lady had said. When she'd gone to the bathroom and closed the door, we'd walked over nearby just to keep an ear on her. She seemed unstable, but not to the point that we thought she'd try to harm herself. As I'm telling you this, I realize what it must sound like. Like this woman was on the edge, and we just let her go to the bathroom. But she was afraid. And it just seemed like shock. In that line of work, you have to be able to read people. Well, we were reading her. And neither of us felt she was at risk. The water had been running. And we'd heard a creak. You know, like she'd sat down on top of the toilet or leaned against the counter. Something. But that was it. No crying. Didn't sound like she was moving around at all. I knocked on the door. And we didn't get a response. Knocked again. But in a hurry. When she didn't answer, I tried to open the door. But she'd locked it. So I busted the handle. She'd taken the blades out of one of those single-use razors. There were 2 blades. I know what you're thinking. She tried to slash her wrists. Right? Wrong. She'd cut out her tongue. There was blood everywhere. All over the sink, the floor, the mirror, on top of the toilet. The tongue itself was sitting on the counter next to the sink. Right next to the cup that had her toothbrush in it. Catherine. I think her name was Catherine. That's gonna drive me crazy. But she was sitting on the edge of the bathtub. Totally silent, still as calm as she had been when she'd gotten up to go in there. Every few seconds she'd spit out a mouthful of blood into the tub. It was horrifying. My partner called for medical. And I did what I could to help plug up the bleeding. Which wasn't much. Oh, and on the shower wall, she'd written in her own blood the words, "His face." Which, I don't know what that was supposed to mean. Still today don't know what it meant. It wasn't an indicator of what it had looked like or anything. Just, I don't know. She ended up in the hospital, of course. Then was remanded to a psych facility for a few days. I remember my partner at the time. He looked her up a few years after I was out. And, she was living with her sister. And by that time she'd been arrested. Twice. For heroin possession. Her life really fell apart after that. My grandpa was thinking for a moment. And had a look of remorse on his face. So, anyways. So that was odd enough. The whole thing with the guy walking backwards. Whatever his face looked like. The weird things he was saying. But that wasn't it. So he'd take these people. We'd follow them on cameras when we could. But eventually we'd lose them. Sometimes the victims. They'd be missing for days. Sometimes weeks. The longest any of them was missing was a guy. About your age, I'm 30. He was missing for about 6 weeks. But they'd always turn up. And they'd always turn up in the same way. There'd be a call placed to 911. And the call would always essentially sound the same. We just got home. And there's a dead body in our house. So there were 7. 7 of these murders. That we know about. 3 had already happened by the time I got put on the case. The lead before me hit his 20 and left the force. So I dealt with 4 of these. The girl from the 3rd ward. She'd been missing for 2 days shy of a month. Towards the end of August. She showed up like all the others did. They were always in surrounding areas. Never anywhere near where they'd gone missing. This poor couple, the wife had come home from work about 2 minutes before her husband. And she'd walked in the house to find this 13-year-old girl's body propped up in a reclining chair in the living room. This girl's body, she'd been frozen. And when the unis got there, maybe 10 minutes after the call was made, she was still ice cold to the touch. Like she'd just been dropped there right before the wife had gotten in. Had just barely started thawing. Her skin was black, like she had the worst kind of frostbite over every inch of her body. There was dried blood coming from her nose, ears, eyes. You could barely see it. But it was there. She'd been posed. She had one leg over the other. And she had one hand held up. And the son of a bitch had put an empty champagne glass in it. But the worst part, her face. This was a pretty girl. Or she had been. But, well, her face was solid black. But she was, shit. She was smiling, lips curled up, toasting like she was celebrating something. That was the worst part about it. To me at least. The other ones were. They were different but equally as twisted. One of them was the guy the first mentioned earlier. On Juno. He was found at a house in Brookfield. Burnt to a crisp. And he was still smoldering. Too. Like he'd just been put there the second before the people got home. He was posed too. He was in their rec room. And he'd been set up like he was tossing a dart at their dartboard. And then one day, they just stopped. It just never happened again. The only thing related to the backwards man that happened after that last murder was, well, I shouldn't say the only thing. I don't want to diminish it. It was very unfortunate. What happened? I should say that the last thing related to the backwards man that I dealt with. And as far as I know, the last thing to happen with him in our city was this poor girl. She was in her early mid-20s. Going to graduate school. She had just had a baby maybe 6 months before. And She'd been walking from the local college campus to the parking garage. And somewhere between those two, he'd shown up. Whole thing was caught on the security cameras. And again, no matter the angle, his back was always to the camera. They talked for a minute. And this time, he turned around. Her faced her. We couldn't see it. Because, you know, whatever the hell happens with the cameras. They talked for just a second after that. But instead of her following him, he just left. Just walked away. She stood there for about 10 minutes. Still as a statue. Just looking into the distance. Kind of a 1,000-yard stare. She eventually went back to her car. Stopped at the store. Picked up diapers. Started cooking dinner for her husband and son. While whatever they were having for dinner was cooking, she sat down at their kitchen table. Wrote something down on a piece of paper. Folded it over once. And set it down on one of the end tables next to their couch. Then she went into her closet and hung herself from one of the bars. Her husband had been playing with their son and hadn't noticed her put the piece of paper down. The smoke alarm went off. And he went looking for her. Found her in the closet. The note just said, his face, as many times as she could fit on the piece of paper. My grandpa was drained after this one. Reading these transcriptions is one thing. But when I sit down with him and he tells me these verbally for me to record and transcribe, it's apparent how all these cases affected him emotionally. And keep in mind, these are just the impossible ones. Besides those, he still has nearly 3 decades worth of normal, explainable cases weighing on him. My grandpa then said something despite his clear exhaustion from the memory of this one. And even after my insistence that he is under no obligation to share any of this with me if he doesn't want to. Let's make that call. Get you on the line with my pal in Arizona. I know he's got a story or two that'll really kick your ass. After my grandpa told me about the last case, the one about the backwards man, he told me to make the tentatively planned Skype call to a colleague of his in Arizona. Connectivity issues on both sides didn't allow us to have the call when we'd initially planned. And schedules then got in the way after that. That said, we all eventually found the time. Got the call connected. And my grandpa and I were soon talking to a detective in Arizona named Adam. A man my grandpa had met at a conference years prior. Little small talk was made. My grandpa quickly got to the point. I know we talked about it a little. You know, about those cases. The kinds that don't make any sense? My grandpa said, "Oh, yeah, what did you guys call them? The impossible cases? The impossible ones. That's right. That's right. Down here they're called the inconceivables. Like the movie." My grandpa joked. They laughed for a moment. During which time Adam said that they did indeed get the name from The Princess Bride. And then he went into one of his very own impossible cases. There's a lot of desert down here. A lot of long, empty roads with nothing but open land on either side. A few skinny trees here and there. Some cacti. But no real structures or anything to speak of. I got called out to a crime scene in had to be around 2002. It was right after 9/11. I remember. Not that one has anything to do with the other. Anyhow, I drive out there, and this is in the middle of nowhere. Like, I had to drive 20 minutes off the road just to get to it. Middle of nowhere. It was the middle of the night when I got there. 2, 3 in the morning. So they had these big floodlights set up outside the tape. And the tape was set up way farther out than I initially would have thought necessary. Real wide around the focal point of why I'd been called out. But I'll get to that. There were a few little pathways that we could take to get to her. And I was led in by one of the officers. Standing there in the middle of this big-ass area was a woman. Looked maybe about 30? She was standing mid-stride, like she was just walking through the desert, and 1 second she just... boom. Died. Her foot was pointed up like she'd just taken a step, and then she'd just frozen. We had the techs out there trying to figure out exactly where she'd come from. That was one of the weirdest things. The footprints. So, leading up to where this woman was, there were no footprints. Ground didn't have any imprints whatsoever. Not in the slightest. Not leading up to where she was standing. It was like she'd just floated down right out of the sky. But around her, maybe 15 yards or so, there were these. I actually don't want to call them prints. Because they weren't. But these tracks? I don't know what to call them. They were like something had been shuffling around. Something big. I mean, they looked like they stepped lightly. But when they were pointed out to me, I could plainly see that they'd left depressions in the ground. But they weren't shaped or structured like footprints. They were these weird, these kind of collections, I guess you'd say, of spirals. Spirals. Groups of 5 or 6 of them of different sizes and angles. Where if you drew a line around them, it would look, I guess maybe like a rhombus. I remember there were 4 separate collections of these. So 25 different sized spirals. Some circular, some triangular, some square-shaped. 20 to 25 total. If you drew a line around the collections of rhombuses, rhombi, if you drew a line around those, it made almost a perfect rectangle. There's no real way to put it into words. And I know this is for the blog. Whatever Steve said you were doing with these. We took a short aside. During which time I told Adam about no sleep and how I felt it was the only place there was a real chance a lot of eyes could get on their tellings of what goes on in these impossible instances. Where was I? Ah. Shit. Okay. So it was the desert. It was cold. Maybe 40 degrees. Give or take. But parts of this girl's skin were frostbitten. If it would have been her whole body, I might have thought she'd been walking naked through the Arctic after getting out of a swimming pool filled with ice water. You know that dark purple, black color? But they're just these patches all over her. Big section of her thigh. Tops of her knuckles. Side of her neck. Her shoulder blade. Like these spots of her had been dipped in sub-zero temperatures or something. But just those parts. I don't know. Oh, the tracks. That's what we were talking about before. So, like I said, they made a big circles about 15. Maybe closer to 20 yards out from her. Each one of the rectangles. The ones with the 4 rhombuses in them? They must have been 12. 15 feet apiece. Maybe 6 feet wide. Fucking huge. These things. I know you might be thinking, it sounds like someone drew them. But the text said that the depression pattern in the ground indicated that the symbols were most depressed on the ends. Not so much in the middle. Like someone stepping heel to toe. Obviously someone could have done this on purpose. But why? They went in a circle around this woman. And they overlapped each other a whole lot. Like someone was just doing laps. I suppose it's worth mentioning. We didn't realize all the spirals and the shapes and everything right away. It took a few days before the techs put it together. I mean, the shapes were apparent right away. But I just mean the patterns and all that. When you first looked at it, it just looked like a bunch of nonsense scribbles with no rhyme or reason to it. Craziest thing about those tracks? Maybe 200 yards away, there was another big circle of them. Same circumference, but like they'd just made one circle. No laps. And the depression on that one was deep, like it had stomped down. About 200 yards after that one was another one. Depression even deeper. And that was it. They said it was like whatever had left it had dropped out of the sky and landed. Boom. Then jumped. Boom. Another one. And jumped again. And landed lightly on the last one. Then circled this woman. No idea what it could have been. Obviously. Usually with the weird ones. Some people speculate. Not with those. Though. No one could come with any kind of explanation. Back to the girl. She didn't have any ID on her. No wallet. Purse. Nothing. She was wearing a tank top and shorts. How I said she was frostbitten. Well, her face wasn't at all. It was as dry as I've ever seen a face in my life. Her lips were cracked all to shit. Skin was sunburnt. Flaky. That's why when the medical examiner, told us her cause of death was drowning, we couldn't believe it. By all accounts, drowning should have been the last possible cause of death. But the ME said she would stake her whole career on it, that any subsequent analysis of the autopsy results by other MEs would yield the same results. And it wasn't a dry drowning. It was like she'd been held underwater until she died. Her stomach contents. I remember. There was water, of course. But there were also blades of grass. So initially we think maybe she was starving. Tried eating some grass. Yeah, it was sod. Fake grass. There wasn't a whole lot of it in there. You know. She didn't have a whole front lawn in her stomach. But there was enough that you could cover maybe the bottom of a water bottle with the grass standing up. You know what I mean? Oh, even more fucked up? Get this. She'd put the time of death as being about 8 hours after I'd shown up in the desert. No kidding. She'd apparently been alive the whole time I was skulking around checking it all out. I'd been right up close to her. Inches away. And I didn't see her chest moving. I didn't feel any breath coming out of her. Nothing. Didn't make a shred of sense. And that was just the time she recorded. She said there were multiple factors that contradicted one another. How I said she was standing. Rigor mortis had somehow set in instantly. ME said it was impossible. But that's what it was. But despite the rigor mortis being an indicator of TOD, her stomach contents made the ME think it hadn't been that long. Same with the fact that no insects had other little creepy crawlers were anywhere near her. But then there was the fact that a few of her organs were deteriorated. Like she'd been dead for days. It was just... I still can't wrap my mind around it. Alright, anyways, we had to find out who this woman was. We started looking at recent missing persons reports. Far back as 6 months. Didn't turn up anything. Checked with the surrounding states. Nothing. Her fingerprints. Well, that wasn't like anything I'd ever seen. She had 2 sets of fingerprints on each finger. That's a bad way to put that. On each finger. She had half of one fingerprint on the left. And half of another fingerprint on the right. The lines just didn't connect like they should have. Again, it would be easier to show you what I mean. But you can't really show what I mean through the written word. But it was bizarre. We had a specialist come in, try to reconstruct the prints. But nothing came of it. Then about, maybe 3 months after she was found out there, a call was placed to 911. Word for word, a man's voice said, "The woman in the desert, Amber Lee." Then they hung up. The call was placed from a payphone outside a convenience store in Massachusetts. One that had been out of service for about 2 years. Never mind the fact that the phone didn't even work. But how the hell did someone dial 911 and get connected to dispatch across the country? We called over to Massachusetts State Police. Sent them over the woman's picture. Had them go through their databases. Missing persons. All that. There was nothing about her there. There was a woman with the name Amber Lee that lived in a suburb outside of Cambridge. But she was alive and well. We never found out who Amber Lee was or how she wound up in the desert. And, you know, that's tragic. This woman, whoever she was, she might have had family. People who loved her. Even if not, she deserved better than what happened to her. But for as tragic as what happened to her is, it's not what fucks with me. What fucks with me is the fact that there's something out in the desert. Something that even if we knew what it was and how to find it, I don't think we'd be even halfway equipped to deal with it. After he was done telling us the story, he offered to put us in touch with both his son, a current Arizona homicide detective, and a colleague out in Colorado who he knows has some crazy stories. So hopefully we'll hear from them soon. After we hung up, he called back about 2 minutes later. Tell your friends on the blog that there's not much of a story to this one. Just something that happened that we never figured out. Never had a single clue on. Never found out who it was. Who did it. How it was done. Nothing. There's about 100 things wrong with this one. But it'll be funny to make them scratch their heads trying to figure it out. Because it really just doesn't even sound possible, logistically or otherwise. Some folks were bowling, and right in the middle of a game, this little girl throws her ball. Then she's standing at the return waiting for her ball to come back. And out comes a human head. Male, maybe 40 years old. Take care, boys. I had a good career. You know, these weird cases were few and far between. And when I wasn't chasing my tail looking for clues that wouldn't lead anywhere even if I found them. I feel like I really made a difference. Scary as hell. Sometimes. Yeah, but I wouldn't change a thing. Your grandmother. I don't know. I don't want to scare you. I've been putting this one off since I started telling you about these damn cases. My grandpa was very apprehensive about sharing this particular case. More so than any of the others. When he said he didn't want to scare me, I suggested that with everything he'd already told me, the chances of that were slim. Even still, he was particularly worried that the contents of the case would affect me. Nevertheless, I assured my grandpa I would be fine. And he begrudgingly continued, "All right. Well, God. This one hits home." So by the time I made detective, I'd been with your grandmother for a while. A long time. In 1981? Maybe 80. One of the two. My partner and I caught one. Now, this wasn't immediately apparent as being an impossible one. There were little hints of odd things. But I could tell my grandpa was questioning whether or not to continue telling me about this case. So, the case was a double homicide at a real nice apartment building downtown. You know, a high-rise, overlooking the lake, all that. Now, the apartment belonged to a man and his wife. I remember the man's name was Scott. Scott something. Scott was one of the two victims. He'd been. I don't want to be gratuitous. Your folks on the website don't need to hear all the nasty business. But, okay. Picture someone laying down on their back, arms at their sides, starting at the tip of his right shoulder and going diagonally downwards to the bottom of his left elbow. He'd been cut. I don't mean someone had slashed him with a knife. I mean, God, he'd been cut clean through. Like someone took a giant axe and hit him at that angle. He'd been cut there, and then from his right hip to just above his left knee. And then again from his right knee to his left ankle. The cuts were so clean that we didn't realize at first he'd been vivisected. He was wearing a suit and tie. And the cuts were so clean that he just looked like a normal dead body in a pool of blood. You can imagine our surprise when the coroners went to move the body and he fell into a whole bunch of pieces. Shit. So, yeah. There was another body. Scott was married, but the body wasn't his wife's. It was this. This old lady. Must have been in her 90s. Nothing was done to her. She was determined to have died from natural causes. We initially thought maybe the wife had been abducted. And, you know, of course we had to look at her for the death of her husband. But, this old lady, she'd been reported missing from a nursing home the day before. A nursing home in. Shit, where was it? Sunrise, Florida. We spoke to the staff over the phone. And there was one nurse there. She'd just walked this woman back to her room and given her her medications. She was supposed to mark down on a form when she'd last taken her meds. But she'd left her pen in the common area just outside the room. She stepped out for about 5 seconds, as she put it, and when she stepped back in, lady was gone, vanished into thin air. That was at about 4 p.m. Meanwhile, about 4:15 p.m., maybe 5 minutes away from the nursing home, a woman was detained after behaving erratically, taken to a mental health facility. That woman was Scott's wife. She'd been at work that day, and towards the end of the day she disappeared. Everyone thought she'd left the office early for the day. She didn't buy a plane ticket, a bus ticket, a hot air balloon ride. Her car was still in the parking garage at her office building. They'd just switched places. Kind of. Not an exact switch though. We don't know how the old lady ended up in Scott and his wife's apartment. Oh, and Scott's wife. Amanda. That was her name. Amanda. She'd been picked up screaming at the top of her lungs. But after that, she went catatonic. Completely. Stone cold catatonic. God. Damn it. So the whole thing is strange. Unexplainable. All that. You know by now how these things go. But, shit. This one though. We start going through the apartment, trying to figure out who these people are. I mean, we know who they are. But, you know, trying to figure out what might have led to this point. My partner happens upon some photo albums. And, my grandpa started tearing up at this point, and had to take a few moments to collect himself. he finds some photo albums. And there's pictures of us, of me and your grandma. Pictures from our wedding, from games we'd gone to. The first picture we took when we bought our first house together. Even pictures from when we were kids. Long before we knew each other. I'm trying to reason it out. I think maybe Scott or his wife is someone your grandma knows. Or someone in the family knows. But it's only pictures of us. No one else in the family. And your grandma didn't have any clue who they were. It was all logged into evidence. We kept working the case. Never figured out who killed Scott and we never figured out how he was cut so cleanly. Doesn't even seem possible. Anyways, about a year after that, your grandmother and I are sitting at the dinner table. Your mother too, and the phone rings. Your grandma gets up and answers it. Fuck, you know. She says, hello, and the color just drains from her face. Like she saw a ghost. Then she bursts out in tears. Just hysterical sobbing. And you know your grandma. She's a strong woman. The strongest. I get up and take the phone from her. And it's just a dial tone. I kept asking her, who was it? Who was it? And she just cried and cried and cried. I asked what whoever it was said. And she just shook her head. She's never told me what was said on that phone call. Even to this day, she wouldn't tell me who it was. Either. For a while. About a month after the call. It was the middle of the night. And, you know that feeling you get. Like you're being watched? I remember I felt that. Except I was asleep. I opened my eyes and your grandmother was standing on my side of the bed. Just staring down at me. I didn't know how long she'd been there. But I damn near pissed myself. The hell you doing, Pat? I ask her. And she just looks at me and says, it was Amanda on the phone. After she said that, she took these weird, choppy steps back to her side of the bed. Like she was only moving one part of her body at a time to get where she was going. Her toes, then her foot, then her leg, and so on and so forth. It was goddamn. My grandpa tears up again. It was goddamn horrifying. I didn't go back to sleep that night. The next morning, when your grandma woke up, she had no memory of it happening. When I asked her if the person who had called her a month earlier had been named Amanda, she got real worked up and said she didn't want to talk about it. And then she got sick, physically sick, ran to the bathroom, threw up. Then that night, I woke up again in the middle of the night and your grandma was out of bed. The light in the hall was on. And the stairs to the attic were down. I went up there, and your grandma was. She was sleeping on the floor of the attic. And it looked like she'd gone through a bunch of boxes. There was a whole bunch of stuff we'd stored up there all thrown around. And she was sleeping next to some photo albums. Most of them were our old ones. But there was one, and it was pictures of Scott and Amanda. From their wedding day. From when they were kids. There was no reason we should have had it. And the album was in with a bunch of stuff we hadn't touched in years. I woke your grandma up. And she didn't remember going up there. By that point I was obviously onto different cases. And this one was just filed in with the other impossible ones. But, and I didn't notice this until years later, every year on May 12th. Your grandmother gets sick, real sick. It's gotten worse as the years have gone by. Remember last year, when she was in the hospital for a few days? Dehydrated? It was that. May 12th is Amanda's birthday. I've gone over everything more times than I can remember. Hundreds of times. Trying to find a connection. There isn't one. The closest thing to a connection between us and them that I could find was that my dad's brother, Alfred, he owned an apartment building on the east side where it was one of them. I think it was one of Scott's great aunts had rented. Something really far back and really meaningless. I've told you about a lot of these. And I know I've said that one or another was the one. The one I could never get out of my head. The one that still, after all these years, really gets to me. But this one. This is the one. This is the one that I still look into every year. I call over to the precinct and see if they've come across anything new. Of course they never have. Your mother. She's connected to it too. Some way. I'll let you ask her about it though. Or your grandma. But I'll bet she's not going to want to talk about it. You can. My grandpa went into a coughing fit and said he was done for the night. And that he didn't want to talk about the case anymore. On December 30th, while we were all at my grandparents' house, my grandfather was quite sick. But he'd mustered up all the energy he could so as not to drag the evening down. He was always thoughtful like that. We would have been happy to spend time with him in his room, if that's what was needed. But he refused. He wanted to be up and helping and talking and enjoying the night with all of us. At around 9 p.m., the phone rang. He was sitting in a chair in the kitchen. And he reached over to the desk behind him and grabbed the cordless phone. He said, "Hello," and as soon as he did, I saw the color drain from his face. His lips started quivering and his eyes welled up with tears. I quickly grabbed the phone from him and put it to my ear. But there was nothing but the 3 tones that generally accompany the "we're sorry, but your call cannot be completed as dialed" message. Repeating over and over. I looked to my grandpa and asked if he was okay. He simply looked at me and said, "It was Amanda on the phone." And with that, my grandfather took a look around the room, sat back in his chair, and passed on to the hereafter. When all of the funeral and will business was completed, I used the information my grandpa had given me in this case to reach out to a relative of Amanda, her sister Anne. I explained that I knew reaching out to the mental health facility she was at would be useless, as they couldn't and wouldn't divulge any information nor allow me to speak with her. Anne informed me that her sister had died just over 4 years earlier. And despite there being several people in the house, all of whom acknowledged hearing the phone ring, the phone records showed that my grandparents' home didn't receive a call anywhere near 9 p.m. on December 30th, 2019. I think of all the impossible cases my grandpa ever worked, this is the one that truly haunted him the most. In his memory, I'm going to continue his tradition of reaching out to his old precinct every year to see if any new developments have arisen. For now, I know that wherever my grandpa is, he's regaling anyone else who will listen with the stories of an honorable life well lived.